the greatest ever drivers in Formula One? Well, opinions differ, but I've chosen my top 10 from the hundreds of Grand Prix drivers I've seen and admired over the years. Now, it's hard to compare drivers from different generations because of their different circumstances, but these are my heroes, the men who've most impressed me. You may well disagree. Off we go then. Now, my number 10 is the one I know best of all, Nigel Mansell. I saw all of Nigel's 187 Grand Prix, his 31 victories, and of course, the 5 British Grand Prix wins that made him a great national hero. While Nigel may have had both admirers and critics within the closed world of Formula One, he really took the British public by the throat. No racing driver before or since has ever captured their imagination quite so much. He managed to give the fans who dreamt of being world champion the feeling that they could do it too, for they knew the sacrifices he had made to find the money to break into Formula One.
The money that we'd sort of saved and put together in this house and the things I'd sold in 7 weeks was spent, and more money I might add, because I borrowed more money. And then after 7 weeks, everything had gone. You know, and you sit there, you got no house, you got no drive, all you've got is a lovely wife, and no job.
He's overdone it. Maybe.
From his early days in Formula Ford in the 70s, I certainly felt Nigel's determination would pay off.
But there is the new leader, the man who is being tipped as a future Formula One ace.
After a Formula 3 crash where he crushed a vertebra in his neck, Mansell was told he'd have to stay in hospital for 6 months. But the following week he was offered a test drive with Lotus and Nigel discharged himself. His gamble worked and he was hired as a driver for 1980. It was 5 hard-fought years and 72 Grand Prix before Mansell won his first race. But in that time, Nigel developed supreme car control. This enabled him subsequently to beat Senna, Prost and Piquet, who won 10 championship titles between them. And he'll always be remembered as one of the great overtakers.
And Mansell going round the outside! Incredible! In 10 races,
Once he had a sniff of victory, he was mighty hard to beat.
Oh, fantastic!
In front of his adoring home crowd at Silverstone, having been delayed by a pit stop, he sold his teammate Piquet this dummy at 180 miles an hour and went on to win. Nigel exploited the drama of Formula One, playing to the crowds and emphasising the hardships of a race.
Surely that's too much even for him. And it is. He's fainted.
The engine or electrical problem, it just...
Some of the team managers he worked with said he was difficult and a moaner. Nigel was very sensitive to such criticism. Luck wasn't always with him. In the last race in 1986 at Adelaide, he'd certainly have been champion if his tyre hadn't exploded.
And look at that! Out that, and colossally, that's Mansell!
And when he finally became champion in 1992, it was just reward for over 20 years of gritty self-belief.
And he's world champion!
Nigel will always be remembered for his driving brilliance, his perseverance, and a bulldog spirit which united an entire nation behind him. At number 9 is the legendary Ferrari driver, a dapper Italian named Alberto Ascari. For 2 seasons early on in the World Championships, Ascari utterly dominated Grand Prix racing, and his record of 9 successive wins is still unbeaten. He was the son of one of the great Italian motor racing heroes of the 1920s, Antonio Ascari. The young Alberto idolised his father and often watched him race. He was only 7 when his father was killed, leading the 1925 French Grand Prix. To his mother's dismay, her young son decided to follow in his father's footsteps. At 18, he began racing motorbikes with great success before moving on to cars. I count myself privileged to have watched him at work because he was a supreme stylist. Smooth and polished, he made it seem so easy. It was only when you looked at a stopwatch that you realised how fast he was. In terms of domination by one man, his success in the World Championship will probably never be beaten. For over a year, no one except Ascari won a championship race. His chubby build belied his fitness and stamina. Ascari's open, warm and professional attitude endeared him to the world. He handled the media in a way which would be impressive today.
È una corsa molto interessante perché è la prima corsa dopo la pausa invernale, quindi sia la Ferrari che le altre fabbriche hanno portato molte modifiche, perciò non sappiamo ancora quale sarà la macchina migliore. Ad ogni modo noi abbiamo molto fiducia nella Ferrari e speriamo di tornare in Italia con qualche bella vittoria.
Despite the fact that Ferrari was now the best car, Ascari still had to beat his mentor and teammate Villaresi, as well as other world-class opposition, champions Fangio and Farina. He won the title in 1952 and 53. Ascari was more comfortable at the front of a race, preferring to dominate than fight his way through the pack. At Monaco in 1955, Ascari was lying second when the crowds waved to signal that Moss's leading Mercedes had retired. Distracted, he lost concentration and his car flew off the road and into the harbour. He was lucky not to drown. Later that week, Ascari was trying out a colleague's sports car when it mysteriously left the track and he was killed, leaving behind a wife and 2 young children. His death left Italy stunned. It was an eerie coincidence that both he and his father were killed at the age of 36 on the 26th of the month, 4 days after a spectacular escape. More than any other driver, Alberto Ascari helped to create the mystique that surrounds Ferrari to this day. When he died, his career was still at its height. Who knows what he might have achieved if he had lived to race on. At number 8 is a man who wasn't just a remarkable racing driver, but is a remarkable human being. From Vienna, it's the great Niki Lauda. Niki drove in 171 Grand Prix from 1971 until 1985. Racing against the likes of Stewart, Fittipaldi, Hunt, Piquet and Prost, he won 25 races and 3 world championships. It all started when a teenage Niki got hold of a Volkswagen Beetle. Although his wealthy father was against it, Niki was determined to race. Virtually disowned, he left home and cannily used his father's reputation to get a bank loan. He spent 3 self-financed years racing in Formula 2 and Formula 1, but needed to repay his loans. Luckily for him, his abilities paid off just before the bank foreclosed, and he was hired by Ferrari. Then he began to win races, coming 4th in the 1974 championship. The very next year, he took the title. In 1976, he was comfortably leading the championship again when he crashed his Ferrari at the Nürburgring. In the wreckage, he almost burned to death. Having come through an ordeal that would put any normal man off racing cars for life, Lauda was back again at the Italian Grand Prix after only 6 weeks. Dreadfully scarred and still in great pain, he finished in the points. Lauda might still have won the championship that year, but he withdrew from the final race in Japan, saying the conditions were too dangerous. In making this principled stand, he demonstrated yet another sort of courage. And he still only lost the championship to James Hunt by a single point. His experiences had enabled him to put the dangers of motor racing into perspective.
I like the car, and I like to go over 100 miles an hour. I like to take chances. I like to take the risk. So this is one part. But I don't like to die going down the stairs because I think that's stupid.
Lauda was never seduced by public glory or fame and success. The contest within himself was what motivated him. Niki went on showing that he was his own man. Before the end of the 1979 season, he suddenly retired, saying he was fed up with driving round in circles. Instead, he founded an airline and took on the major companies with all the competitive aggression he'd brought to his racing. Then, 3 years later, to help finance his airline, he decided to return. Other Formula One drivers had retired and come back, usually without much success. But Lauda declared he'd be a winner again within 3 races. It was a bold claim, but sure enough, at Long Beach in California, he won in his 3rd race back.
But that he has won.
And now
He went on to become champion a 3rd time at the age of 35.
there he is. There is the world champion of 1984.
And made no secret that this final title was the sweetest. Niki Lauda battled throughout his racing life against great drivers and adverse circumstances, maintaining his practical yet positive approach. He may have lacked the outward charisma of those above him on my top 10, but there's no doubt he's a most extraordinary man. At number 7, a man who arrived in Formula One when safety was virtually non-existent and death was frequent. He not only became a superstar, but conducted a crusade to make Formula One safer. It's the Flying Scot, Jackie Stewart. Jackie raced in 99 Grand Prix from 1965 to 1973, winning 27 of them and 3 World Championships. In many ways, Jackie was the first of the modern sporting superstars. A self-styled public figure with fashionable clothing and hairstyle, he befriended royalty and was treated like a rock star. As stylish out of the car as he was in it, he was extremely articulate about his craft.
The spectacular driver is never the quick one. The spectacular driver usually goes slower because of all the mistakes and all the heroics he's going through. And in fact, you want to settle things down very quietly and very sedately. And if you drive very easily and let it flow, your chances are the slowest way is the fastest way, and you don't make mistakes.
No genius at school because of undiagnosed dyslexia, Jackie excelled first as a world-class shot, which needed the same skills of concentration and reaction that he'd later need when he began motor racing. He was an instant success behind the wheel, and on his very first Formula 3 test, he consistently beat the lap times of more experienced drivers. It wasn't long before he moved up to Formula 1. He forged a magical working relationship with team owner Ken Tyrrell, for whom he won all but 2 of his 27 Grand Prix victories and all 3 of his world titles. Throughout his career, Stewart faced stiff competition. One of the most exciting races I ever commentated on was the 1969 Italian Grand Prix.
Can Stewart hold the line on this, the last lap? And it's going to be a French Matra to win. It must be. It's over the line together. And it's almost a dead heat. It's Jackie Stewart, Rich, Beltoise and McLaren. Nobody has ever seen the finish of a motor race like that.
Jackie worked hard at everything, not just his driving. His detailed cerebral approach was new in the 1960s, as was his determination to make racing safer. This made him unpopular, but there are drivers today who owe their lives to his crusading zeal.
In our sport, we seem to breed a certain type of man that walks down memory lane and says, it's a lovely day, it's a beautiful lane, memory lane anyway, it's a very happy place to be. And we didn't have these things, so why should those chaps now have them? They're getting paid to do a thing that we never got paid to do. They should have danger.
Jackie Stewart retired at the pinnacle of his career. putting his family before future racing glories. He planned to retire after the last race of 1973, but then tragedy struck. His close friend and teammate Francois Sever was killed in practice. The Tyrrell team withdrew, and Jackie never raced in what would have been his 100th Grand Prix. Now chairman of his own team, Stewart still displays the same qualities he did as a driver. Positive, professional, and with meticulous attention to detail. Jackie's someone who'd have been a success in life whatever he'd done. It's to the sport's huge benefit that he chose Formula One. 4 down, 6 to go. We've got to take a break now, but my next driver is someone you'll be seeing on the grid this weekend. Now, at number 6 is a man most people accept as being today's finest driver. From Germany, it's Michael Schumacher, the youngest ever world champion. At the age of 30, Michael's already won 33 Grand Prix and 2 World Championships. And he's really worked for his success. Michael was racing karts almost before he could read and write. And by the age of 15, he was German junior kart champion. After becoming German Formula Ford and then Formula 3 champion, Michael starred in the Mercedes sports car team on the way to achieving his ultimate goal of Formula One. Having qualified an incredible 7th at Spa on his first ever Formula One drive, Schumacher had his first victory there just 1 year later.
And he is naturally elated.
What really matters is the man is incredibly fast. Watch how he carries his speed through the corners as he goes for the ultimate qualifying lap, and you'll see at once that his is a very special talent.
I think the main ability I have is that I have a good feeling for the limit. I'm able to run the car for almost 100% on the limit, and that's probably the difference in style, where someone has the ability to do that in the entry of the corner but not in mid-corner, and then the exit again, or the other way around, and I can almost do this all the way around the corner.
Because Schumacher is consistently close.
In assessing a driver's greatness, you have to look at the use he makes of his equipment.
Michael Schumacher is perfectly fairly holding on to his racing line. He's not doing anything wrong. He's in the lead. A magnificent...
Schumacher won back-to-back championships for Benetton when they didn't really have the best car.
On the grid. Now, if that's happened to him...
And in 1997 and 98, he nearly won the title again, even though his Ferrari wasn't the top car.
Fantastic! Hakkinen fights back. This is magnificent. And Schumacher goes through.
A wet track can be a great leveller of car differences. And Schumacher's natural talent means that in extreme driving conditions, he is extraordinary.
And Schumacher has brilliantly worked his way up.
Michael Schumacher is the epitome of the modern Formula One driver. He works prodigiously hard at every aspect of the business, from dealing with the media to gathering the team around him and uniting their sense of purpose. However, there's no shortage of people who'll tell you Schumacher is arrogant. I've never found him to be, but then I've never had to drive against him. But I accept that there is a contentious side to Schumacher. The collision with Hill in Australia that won him the 1994 championship. The collision with Villeneuve in Spain that backfired on him.
Out goes Michael Schumacher. That didn't work.
The collision with Coulthard in Argentina that won him the race. Schumacher's often behaved controversially, but I'm less willing to condemn him than many in Formula One. And he certainly makes no apology for his ruthless will to win.
I don't believe I'm doing anything on top of the regulation, in my view. I'm fighting very hard. I'm trying to use every inch. I'm trying to use everything what is within the rules.
I've put Schumacher at number 6 because he's only just 30 and his best racing could still be ahead of him. A man with a readiness to go to the limit and beyond. Despite his incredible skill, he has displayed flaws. But I believe he'll get better and better. In fact, in my view, he could go on to become the greatest of all time. My number 5 was a racing genius. He won 25 Grand Prix, 2 world titles, and was perhaps the most gifted natural driver of all time. It's Jim Clark. Jim was a shy Scottish sheep farmer who had no ambition to be in the limelight or to be rich and famous. He just loved driving cars fast and almost without effort found he was better at it than anyone else. Jim's early efforts in Scottish club racing were just something to do on weekends off from the farm, but they attracted attention from the motor racing establishment south of the border. In particular, from Lotus boss Colin Chapman, who put Clark in one of his Formula Junior cars. Soon, he became the man to beat. Almost immediately, he graduated to Lotus Formula One, transforming the fortunes of a team which rarely completed races, let alone looked like beating the might of Ferrari or Cooper. A special chemistry had developed between Chapman and Clark. It wasn't in Clark's nature to complain, argue, or dominate his team. Chapman built the cars, sometimes fragile and often unreliable, while Clark just got in and drove them, faster than anyone would have thought possible.
I think this is one of the great things in motor racing, is concentration. Accidents aren't caused by speed that everyone thinks. I think they're caused by a lack of concentration. Quite often on the track, when I want to go faster, I don't drive any faster, I just concentrate harder, which makes me go faster. By concentrating on the braking, by concentrating on the way through the corner, by concentrating on the amount of throttle power I can get on out of a corner, just by concentrating that little bit harder all around.
A quiet man, it was always hard to know what Jim was thinking. Certainly you had the impression that he left the noise and hubbub of the racetrack with relief, to return to his beloved Scottish hillsides.
Motor racing and farming, to my mind, were in a way two opposites. The very fact that they are two opposites helps me enormously to kind of keep a sense of balance.
Clark raced in 56 Grand Prix. He led 42 of them, winning 25 and gaining 2 world championships. It was an incredible record of speed and consistency.
You say in your book that curiosity pushed me on right from the start. Now, what exactly is it you feel you've got to prove?
It's not what I feel I've got to prove at all. I don't really want to prove anything. I enjoy motor racing. I started as an amateur hobby, with no idea or no intention of becoming a world champion. But I was curious to find out what it was like to drive a car fast, to drive on a certain circuit, to drive a certain type of car.
And so, in parallel to their Grand Prix season, the team set their sights on America's most prestigious trophy, the Indianapolis 500. At Clark's first attempt, he was an amazing second, and 2 years later, he won the richest prize in motorsport, in truly heroic style.
Jim Clark crosses the finish line to win the 500 with a comfortable lead of more than 2 minutes.
With 2 world championships and an Indianapolis victory under his belt, Clark's hometown of Duns turned out to give him a hero's welcome. And then, in April of 1968, when Clark was only 32, he reluctantly agreed to take part in a Formula 2 race in Germany. His car had a puncture and spun off into the trees at 140 miles an hour. He was killed instantly. The racing world was in shock. Jim Clark wouldn't have enjoyed the increasing media exposure and stardom that was about to hit Grand Prix racing. But no one since in Formula One history has shown his effortless ability. number 4, my next driver is a living legend. He was the most versatile and talented racing driver Britain ever had. He drove in nearly 500 races and won an amazing 45% of them. Of course, it's Stirling Moss. Stirling was never world champion, but was runner-up 4 years in succession. He started as a teenager in a tiny 500cc Cooper, dominating at race meetings throughout 1949 and 50 on his way to other formulae. For the next 12 years, you always knew if Stirling Moss was on the programme, you were in for a treat. He'd race anything and everything. Touring cars, sports cars, GTs and Formula One. Stirling would excel in them all. Moss was the first modern professional racing driver, and at a time when motor racing was still a sport for the wealthy amateur, he was always aware of the need to give the paying public value for money.
A professional driver, I think, has to go fast, whether he's got the stomachache or not. And if he gets into a car, he's expected to go faster than any other amateur's gone in that car, whether he knows the car or whether he knows the circuit or not, it doesn't really matter. You are expected always to give your best.
Stirling's dogged patriotism always motivated him to drive British cars at a time when British cars weren't winners. It was only in 1954 when his father persuaded him into a faster, Italian-made Maserati that Stirling's talents were recognised on the world stage. Mercedes snapped him up for the following season. And with the German team, Moss was able to compete with the world's best. But Stirling continued to dream of winning for Britain. At Aintree that year, he scored an historic win, the first Briton to win the British Grand Prix.
And the crowds rise to greet Moss, and Moss is waving Fangio up, and they're going to go across the line, giving the victory to Stirling Moss of Great Britain.
Stirling's unique style made it all seem effortless. His calm look in the car, reclining, arms outstretched, head back, was a joy to behold. When another driver let him by, he'd make a public display of courtesy and wave as he went ahead. But for Stirling, it was a serious business.
What does worry me is if I think that I've driven a bad race. That would really worry me. Whether I won it or lost it doesn't really matter. It's annoying if you go out in a race, you know you're leading it or you're well positioned and then suddenly something breaks. This is annoying, it's frustrating, but it doesn't worry me.
In 1957, onto the scene came the British Van Wall. In it, Moss won 3 great races, but none more satisfying than at Aintree, when he took the first ever British Grand Prix win in a British car, something he'd been striving for all his life. Outside Formula One, his versatility shone. In my view, his finest race of all was the 1955 Mia Emilia, in which he averaged an incredible 98 miles an hour on 1,000 miles of winding public roads around Italy to become the only Briton ever to win this legendary race. But the closest Stirling ever came to winning the World Championship was in 1958. That year, he defended his rival, Mike Hawthorne, against an accusation of cheating and got a race result reinstated for him. His gentlemanly act, unimaginable in today's cut-and-thrust world, had cost him the title, although on today's point system, he would have been champion. Of all Moss's Grand Prix victories, to my mind, the very best was at Monaco in 1961, where in a classic David and Goliath fight, he battled with his privately entered Lotus against the latest, more powerful Ferraris, winning there for the 3rd time.
If you can take a private car and then beat the factory with their very latest cars, it is far more exhilarating than taking the same as they've got and then sort of saying, well, it's a good car.
Stirling had become a household name and an enormously popular personality. But at Goodwood on Easter Monday 1962, fighting back after a long time in the pits, he had the shocking and unexplained accident that ended his professional career. Moss nearly died, and the entire country held its breath while he lay unconscious for a whole month. After a long convalescence, he announced his retirement. He subsequently regretted it, and today, nearly 70 years old, he's still racing historic cars with all his old style. Stirling is a national institution. He's the finest racing driver we've ever had, and why the powers that be haven't created him Lord Moss of motorsport is beyond me. Stirling Moss just failed to make my all-time podium. So, which three drivers are on it? Find out after the break. World Championships. It's the great Brazilian Ayrton Senna. Since Ayrton was tragically killed in 1994, he's become almost godlike. So I know my placing of him at number 3 is going to be controversial. But I do have my reasons. The focus and determination which had become the trademark of his career were evident right from the start. Senna was given a kart at the age of 4, and by the time he was 8, he was racing against drivers 10 years older. He took it all very seriously, constantly practicing to improve his skills, including the one which had become the hallmark of his greatness.
I never forget my first race in the wet with go-kart was a disaster. Just complete joke. I couldn't do any good. Then on that day I learned that I knew nothing about running the wet, and from there on I started testing and training the wet. Whenever it was raining, I was there in the circuit training, testing, and then I learned.
But for his career to progress, he had to come to Europe. So he moved to England. Despite enormous success in Formula Ford, Senna didn't get the support he'd expected and went home downcast. But his ambition pulled him back the following year, more determined than ever. And then, in Formula 3, Senna soon made his mark. He took the championship, beating my friend and colleague Martin Brundle into second place. Formula 1 was beckoning. And in Portugal, 1985, only his second year of Formula 1, Senna totally dominated in the wet. In a race which less than half the field completed, he led from pole to flag. He won by more than a minute to claim his first Grand Prix victory.
And Senna has won.
Senna's capacity for hard work and analytical detail was immense. He'd spend longer with his mechanics working on the car than any other driver. His results were stupendous. He competed in 161 Grand Prix, leading for nearly 3,000 laps, more than anyone before or since. And he won 41 times. In qualifying, Senna was simply awe-inspiring. And his total of 65 pole positions will probably never be beaten. Watch him at Monaco, in the days when a driver had to take his hand off the wheel to change gear, and you can see what he meant by living above the limit.
At a given day, you think you have a limit, and you then go for this limit, and you touch this limit, and you think, okay, this is the limit. As soon as you touch this limit, suddenly can go a little bit further. With your determination, your instinct, and the experience as well, you can fly very high.
One of Senna's most memorable races, again in the wet, was the European Grand Prix in 1993 at Donington. Back in 5th place and taking what looked like an impossible line on the wrong side of the track, he managed not only to out-accelerate Schumacher, but drive round the outside of Wendlinger as well. Continuing with some truly astonishing and risky moves, Senna amazingly moved up to first place in the space of the first lap. He went on to win the race by nearly a lap. Ayrton Senna's view of the dangers of motor racing was fatalistic.
And you can be gone, just in a fraction of a second. This is part of your life, and you either face it in a professional, in a cool manner, or you just drop it, just leave it and don't do it anymore, really. And I happen to like too much what I do to just drop it. I can't drop it.
It'll be interesting to see.
His dedication to winning was total, and his God-fearing self-belief was immense. In fact, Ayrton possessed a ruthlessness which could prejudice the safety of others.
And Prost having a look, and Senna's crowding him into the pit wall.
Now, I acknowledge Senna's almost superhuman talent at the wheel and his towering spirit as a competitor. But I can't forget that he decided to resolve the 1990 World Championship by deliberately crashing into Alain Prost at the first corner of the Japanese Grand Prix.
Senna is trying to go through on the inside, and it's happened immediately. This is amazing.
He denied at the time that it was deliberate, but admitted it a long time later. It was this flaw in Senna's character which reluctantly stops me giving him the higher placing that his unique skill and personality deserved. Senna achieved an incredible amount in his 34 years. His tragic death left the world stunned, and his funeral brought Brazil to a total standstill. In life, he was his own man, uncompromising, unyielding, yet very generous and a good friend to those close to him. Charisma is an overworked word these days, but when you were in the presence of Ayrton Senna, there really was an aura. You knew this man was a superstar. Like number 3, I know my number 2 will be controversial, but for me, he more than deserves his place. Firstly, he's the most successful Formula One driver ever in terms of wins and championship points. And secondly, in spite of the immense pressures of modern racing, he's always managed to retain his charm and sportsmanship. It's Frenchman Alain Prost. Alain is much admired and highly respected in the sport, in which he's still very much involved. If greatness were just a matter of statistics, Prost would stand head and shoulders above the rest. During his career, he won an incredible 51 Grand Prix, 10 more than any other driver in history, on the way to 4 World Championships. But of course, it's not just about statistics. Alain Prost was always a perfectionist, a man who planned every race in strategic detail. Analysis, he said, was the key to getting advancement out of every success and every failure. That's why he was called the Professor.
It's not only being the quickest driver on the track, it's you have to work very much on the car itself. You have to work with the designers, with the mechanics, and it's very long job, and you need experience, and it doesn't come like that, after 1 or 2 years into racing.
Prost didn't start serious kart racing until he was 17, but within 2 years he was French and European champion. Then, via a French racing driver school, he soon became European Formula 3 champion. He made his Formula 1 debut for McLaren in 1980, and a year later, driving for Renault in his home Grand Prix at Dijon, came his first win. 8 other victories followed before he returned to McLaren in 1984, winning the championship in both 1985 and 1986. His style was so clean, so consistent and so disciplined that he was actually criticised for being dull to watch. His 4 wins at Monaco showed this perfectly. He kept off the curbs, was easy on his car and looked almost slow. but he was uncatchable. 1988 was his 6th season with McLaren, by now a double world champion and the dominant force in the team, when Ayrton Senna joined as his teammate. At first, it was all smiles.
I think it's gonna get more and more exciting, the championship.
Is it possible to be equal? The championship?
No.
Shit.
Can only be one winner.
That year, the McLaren won just about everything. Prost scored more points, but Senna had more wins and ended up champion. But relations between the two had deteriorated. The next year came the first of 2 successive late-season collisions in the Japanese Grand Prix.
Oh my goodness, this is fantastic! And that means to say that Prost has won the World Championship.
Alain Prost's drive and ambition were combined with a stable common sense and a refusal to take risks for no purpose. In the 1989 Adelaide Grand Prix, torrential rain left the track waterlogged, and Prost tried in vain to get the race stopped. After 1 lap, he withdrew in protest at the dangerous conditions, which later spectacularly defeated Senna. Prost was a clever politician, and he knew how to exploit the media, but he was always good-humoured, courteous and direct, and he did as much work on his personal relationship with the team as he did on sorting out his car. In 1990, unhappy with the atmosphere at McLaren, Alain moved to Ferrari. He won 5 races, but again lost the title to Senna. Prost's strategic talent was amazing. In the 1990 Mexican Grand Prix, he started 13th, but by intelligently preserving his tyres, was able to move up through the field.
Alain Prost, the world champion, winning in Mexico.
In his second year at Ferrari, Prost fell out with the management and was fired. He spent a year away from the cockpit, but came back for 1 more season in 1993 with Williams. The old magic was undimmed. He won 7 races and took his 4th title. Building a successful career as a Grand Prix driver isn't done overnight. But building a successful Grand Prix team is an even tougher challenge. But that's the challenge that occupies Alain Prost today. And that same highly analytical approach that won him 51 Grand Prix could in time see the Professor drive his team to the top step of the podium. So now we come to my number 1. For me, the greatest Formula One driver of all time was a bandy-legged, tubby Argentinian with cool, piercing eyes, Juan Manuel Fangio. Although Fangio raced in Formula One for only 7 seasons, he was world champion 5 times, runner-up twice, and won an incredible 47% of the Grand Prix he drove in. I was lucky enough to see many of his great drives and to have known him personally. When he retired at the age of 47, he had become a legend worldwide. Fangio didn't conform to the boy's own image of a dashing young daredevil racer. He was nearly 39 when he competed in his first Grand Prix. His relentless speed in any kind of car showed more on the stopwatch than in his smooth progress round the track. He could push a car to the absolute limit, yet he was never a flamboyant driver. There was always an inner calm, a refusal to expend unnecessary energy, a serene concentration which gave him an unmistakable style at the wheel.
Bueno, el estilo se va cumpliendo con el tiempo. Nadie nació sabiendo. Yo al principio, cuando yo corría, todo lo agarraba fuerte. Hasta me lastimaba las manos. Después comprendí que no era necesario. Con los dedos se manejaba mejor.
Starting out as a humble, self-taught mechanic, Fangio first came to fame in his homeland, driving modified Chevrolet sedans in South American road races that lasted for days at a time. These developed the extraordinary stamina and depths of resourcefulness which had given him strength throughout his career. After he won the biggest of all cross-country races, from Argentina through Bolivia to Peru and back, his national motor club paid for him to race in Europe. Already 38 years old, this unknown Latin won 3 races in a row and Europe woke up. During the 1950s, Fangio dominated Grand Prix racing. He often competed against men half his age, and his record of 5 World Championship titles is unbroken to this day. As intelligent in business as he was behind the wheel, Fangio only ever signed year-long contracts, so was always in the right team at the right time. Recognised as the best, he had his pick of drives, and he made exceptional use of it. Alfa Romeo, Mercedes, Ferrari and Maserati. He won the championship for all 4 constructors. Fangio spearheaded the much-heralded Mercedes-Benz return to Grand Prix racing and led their 2-year domination of the sport, winning 10 of the 14 Grand Prix. One of Fangio's greatest assets as a driver was his intelligence. He believed in driving only as fast as was necessary to win, driving with metronomic precision and keeping up the pace for lap after lap. This was true for all his racing, but some performances really stand out. In his home Grand Prix in 1955, Fangio demonstrated his extraordinary physical and mental stamina. The race was run in a freakish heatwave. Drivers were passing out with heat exhaustion, their legs burning, and most cars needed 2 or 3 changes of driver to finish. But Fangio drove impassively on to win, though he nearly collapsed after the race. He kept going by telling himself that the sweat coursing down his body was water from a cool mountain stream. But his final victory in the German Grand Prix of 1957 was perhaps his greatest of all, beating men 20 years younger in a drive of ferocious brilliance. Fangio's Maserati led the works Ferraris until a disastrous pit stop. While the mechanics fumbled, the Ferraris went by and disappeared into the distance. Fangio set off in pursuit and settled down to the drive of his life. He broke the lap record 10 times and made up 3/4 of a minute on the Ferraris. And with just 2 laps to go, passed both of them to win. That final victory clinched his 5th championship title. Afterwards, he said he'd never driven as hard in his life, and he never did again. For me, Fangio was simply the best, and I'm proud to have known him. He was an artist in the cockpit, terrifyingly fast and a dauntless competitor. But he wasn't flamboyant, and he didn't play to the gallery. Out of the car, he was calm, courteous, friendly and patient towards his public. Universally liked and revered on the track and off it, Fangio was both a gentleman and a sportsman. So, there we are. Sadly, great drivers like Sir Jack Brabham, Emerson Fittipaldi, Graham Hill and Nelson Piquet, who won 10 world championships between them, haven't made my top 10. But they may well make yours. In time, I'm sure there'll be other truly great drivers. But for now, the 10 I've spotlighted this evening stand for me as the greatest of all time in the sport I love.